Hi, this is Reg Athwal, and welcome to our channel to another episode as part of Family Business Experts, where I get a chance to interview an expert or an entrepreneur who can give us their ideas, words of wisdom, insights that can help us at either a family level, business level, or ideally both. So today I'm joined by, what can I say? The bio is very long, but I'm going to keep it very, very brief. He's a dear friend of mine, Mark Sanborn. And Mark Sanborn is a formal introduction. If you go to globalgurus.org, okay, O-R-G, he ranks as the top 5 leadership experts in the world. Mark is the president of Sanborn Associates, an idea lab for leadership development. And as a leadership strategist, he's authored now 8 books. We could only get 6 on the screen for you, so you'll have to Google the other 2. But these are the 6 books that I think are fantastic. He's got 8 in total and working on others. And includes 2 bestsellers, The Fred Factor and You Don't Need a Title to Be a Leader. His ideas are taught at Crestcom International now in 90 countries, and he's one of the youngest members ever inducted into the Speaker Hall of Fame. Mark is the leadership expert in residence also at the High Point University, the premier life skills university. He's worked with 2,600 clients in his career. Phenomenal. Organizations such as the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, Whirlpool, I'm sure you know who they are, American Express, I know I've got one of those in my wallet somewhere and haven't used for the last few months, Costco, and many others. So I'd like to welcome formally to the show, Mark Sanborn. My dear friend, welcome to the show.
Well, Reg, the pleasure's all mine. It's so great to reconnect. You're right. We've known each other for a very long time. We're separated by time and space, but I have great regard for you and the work you do.
Mark, I really appreciate it. Well, we're going to have different types of people watching this, from entrepreneurs who could be at the first stage of building their enterprise to very large family businesses. So hopefully we can leave them with a few ideas. And I'd like to kick off with your latest book. Could you tell us about this new book that you've just published? What is this intention, imperative, or what's behind this title? And how did you come up with this? And could you give us a few tips on what this means?
Well, it's a timely question because the book came out at the end of 2019, pre-COVID-19. And so one of the thoughts that hit me fairly early in the shelter in place and all the turmoil we faced is, I wonder if the book has just been invalidated or negated. Right. And so I very honestly went back and I looked at both the premise and the 3 shifts that I talk about. And the good news is I don't think anything has changed except perhaps context. You know, context changes application. I'll say communication is always about being heard and hearing and being understood and understanding. And whether you do that via Zoom or email or any medium, the principle's the same. It's how you do it that matters. So the intention imperative came from my work with 4 of my best friends, who you know. We call ourselves the 5 friends. Pardon me.
That's okay.
We were discussing allergies before we started to record. And we were working with a group of entrepreneurs in Phoenix, Arizona, and they were all talking about the challenges that they faced. And most interesting was that they all basically faced the same challenge, and that was clarity. They were either not clear what to do next, they were distracted by a new opportunity and wondered if it was a good or a bad distraction. And it dawned on me after a lot of years working with leaders that clarity is ground zero. That's where you start from. Because if you lack clarity, you're a vague leader, and you might accidentally enjoy some success, but it won't be sustained. However, clarity isn't enough, because I know people, as I'm sure you do, that have grandiose plans. They write everything down. They meet on a regular basis with their team and nothing happens. So the second part of that is clarity followed by consistent action in the world that is. Now, I got lucky because I talked about the world that is versus the world that was. And now we've recycled, because in 2019, that was the world that was. Now we're in the world that is. Because what you do has to fit the challenges of the day. And a lot of people, and frankly, if you're older, and I'm older, so take no offense, this isn't ageism.
Well, I
The
don't think
longer
you
you're in
look
a
that old,
business,
Mark, but never mind. That's a different discussion.
well, the longer you're in a business, the more ingrained you become in your habits, and you do things that used to work even when they don't work as well, until one day you wake up and maybe they're not working at all. So the intention imperative is clarity coupled with consistent action in the world it is. And
Can I ask you, Mark, and I am going to come in quite a few times here because
Sure, yeah.
my brain works this way, but I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, family business owners, some of them multimillionaires, some of them billionaires. And what I've noticed is a pattern where they do get distracted a lot. There's a conflict here or a contradiction, which is on one side, it's what's helped them create so many businesses. But on the other side, they confuse the hell out of their leadership team and management teams. I'd love to get your views around that.
Well, there's a fine line between an opportunity and a distraction. And I just want to digress a bit and say that COVID-19 has been terrible in many ways, but it's created more entrepreneurial opportunities than we've seen probably in the last 100 years, because the pain points are new. There's always been pain points, but there are new pain points, and the people that figure out how to address them, wow, it's going to be, I think we're going to see an amazing surge in entrepreneurial upstarts that literally change not the way the upstarts do business, but the way we live our lives. Now, having said that, if you have a leadership team that's taking its cues from you, it's very important that even though you can change, there's a number of points of clarity. And the first is purpose. If your purpose, and I'm going to make up a very vague example to make it easy.
Yes.
If your purpose is to be of greater service to people, then whatever opportunity comes up, you have to run by that purpose. And if the purpose of the new opportunity is you can make a boatload of money, you're probably not clear on something that's congruent and consistent with what you're doing. Then there's clarity of what you're trying to achieve. And you can measure the outcome a number of ways. Of course, we all think instantly of monetization, but there's other things like impact and innovation. And, in the last few years, you've seen an increase in entrepreneurs that got into their businesses to create a better place for people to work.
Right.
And so if you're clear on your purpose and your outcome, you can fairly quickly disqualify those distractions that are going to lead you down a
Mark, can I ask you what happens if you don't know what your purpose is? And, as you know, with your vast experience, there's people who like to start from that place. I was having a conversation with a family the other day that said, we've got this acronym, VIP, vision, intention, purpose, and the intention fits with your book, where we use intention and not objective because intention is backed by willpower and determination. It's not something that's wishy-washy. But this next gen member said to me, Reg, the vision, we're clear, the intentions, we're clear, and what we need to do and what we must do, but the purpose is not clear for everyone. And that was a really interesting discussion, Mark, where some people discover it when they're quite young. And I remember talking to another entrepreneur a week ago, and he said, Reg, I got to my early 50s and someone asked me, are you fulfilled? And the answer was no. And so all his entire lifetime, he'd been successful, but he wasn't fulfilled and he didn't know what his purpose is. So I'd love to get your thoughts on how do you make sure how do you find your purpose?
That's a big question, but you reminded me of so many things. The book prior to the intention imperative was called The Potential Principle. And that came from addressing that question, because as I worked with leaders, and again, I'm going to generalize a bit, I found there were basically leaders that were very successful in the outer world of doing. And then there were leaders who were very successful in the inner world of being. Now, those inner world leaders I worked with were spiritual leaders, in religious and para-ministry organizations. And as you would expect, when somebody goes into ministry, they probably have done a good bit of soul searching to understand, not all, but understand why they're there. So if I wanted to help the people in the outer world, and you just gave a perfect example, somebody that is busy and looks successful and gets a lot done, but bumps up against that existential wall, and it always comes eventually. Maybe you're 40, maybe you're 70. And that's the question, why have I done this? Why have I busted my hump? Why have I exerted so much energy and possibly ruined relationships?
Right.
And that's when you have to take them into the inner world to do what you're talking about. And that is to help them identify the why. It's never too late. By the way, in case somebody gets a little worried, a good friend of mine called me 15 years ago and he said, I've not been able, he's my age. So 15 years ago, he was well into his middle age. He said, I've never been able to develop my purpose. What should I do? And I said, John, if you can't develop your purpose, do things purposefully. Now, let me explain. A purpose is overarching, right? It pretty much covers everything. But during the day, there are things that we have, opportunities that we can do with intention and have a specific purpose for that thing.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's great to have the overarching and the individual purposefulness, but that also brings me up to two other points. First of all, those inner world leaders, guess how I help them? By teaching them to do things like hold a meeting, give a speech, delegate, communicate. In other words, you just go to the side, the inner or the outer world where you're most lacking, and you develop those skill sets. So what's interesting is I've come to believe that one of the hidden and overlooked jobs of leadership is helping your individual team members discover their purpose. In other words, you want them to buy, obviously an aligned team buys into your organizational purpose. But let's be honest, everybody brings something unique to the party. And what gets powerful is when you can have somebody on your team who wakes up in the morning and doesn't say, I don't feel that hot, I'm burnt out, I'm going to stay home. Versus when you have somebody wake up in the morning and say, you know what, if I stay home, my company's not going to get that unique contribution I make, my sense of humor, my ability to diffuse an upset customer. And it's kind of fun. It's hard work, but it's kind of fun to sit down with your team and instead of just do a performance review, do a purpose review and simply say, what's important to you? Years ago, I had an executive assistant who was a single mom. And frankly, she was from a very wealthy family. She didn't need to work. One of the things I admired about her is she wanted to work, but she didn't need to. So if I wanted to motivate her, I couldn't increase her pay, give her a bonus. I mean, she wouldn't have minded, but it wouldn't have been particularly motivational. What I did is I said, you know what? I know you want to go camping this weekend. You were going to leave after work. Kick off at noon on Friday. Oh my goodness. It was like she had won a Nobel Peace Prize. And that comes from knowing what people's purpose is. And that, by the way, we'll talk about in a little bit. That also comes up later in the book. So how do you develop your purpose? Wow. I think it is
when did you find, let's go a different path. When did you discover your purpose?
Well, I'm a person of faith. I discovered it early on, but I didn't particularly discover how to build on it. It was kind of like I was in a dichotomy, business was business, faith was faith. And over the years, I've tried to appropriately, realizing we live in a very diverse world, not proselytize, but just do business in a way that was honoring to the God that I worship. Yes. And if others noticed, that was all the better. In terms of my kind of career purpose, I discovered that at 16. Now, I started speaking in competition when I was 10, just kids competitions. Right. And I loved it. My first speech, I was incredibly bad. And the only reason I believe to this day that I continued on is because I did so badly, I was humiliated enough, I wanted to master it, instead of humiliated enough that I never wanted to do it again. So that was fortunate. But when I was 16, I heard Og Mandino speak in Akron, Ohio. I drove like an hour and 20 minutes into the big city because I lived on a farm, grew up on a farm.
Can I ask you, Mark, what was he like on stage? I mean, I've got all his books here, but I've never seen this gentleman or seen him live. And you've been, in that era in your career where you've met legends like him. What was he like?
Og was on stage was mesmerizing, but he wasn't what you would call an old school motivational speaker. Right. He told his story. I mean, to me, the most powerful part of Og's work was, being homeless, and I think living in Cleveland and going into public libraries to stay warm and reading books. But I worked with him on a couple committees, and he was a little bit eccentric. If something held, my experience, And Aug's been gone some time now. But my experience was, if something held his attention, he was laser focused. But he wasn't a person of a lot of, he was very focused on the big picture, committee work, discussions, that kind of stuff.
He made an impact that day. Yeah, you were saying.
Yeah, I'll tell you how he made an impact, because I'd already read his books. He'd made an impact on my personal life, but he made an impact because I sat there and I thought, he's getting paid to do this. Now, at some level, I knew there were professional speakers, but I thought, he writes books and he gives speeches and he gets paid. And that was a light bulb for me.
What year was this, Mark?
It would have probably been 1970, 76, 77, I would guess.
Wow.
And so I didn't, obviously I was like maybe a senior or junior in high school. I didn't, drop out of school. I just said, that's my purpose someday. And I joined the National Speakers Association, the International Federation, which didn't exist then. And the reason I joined is because I wanted to learn as much as I could about the business before I got in the business. And I just want to kind of pause on that. Sometimes often we learn what we need to know when we need to know it, but the best time to learn what you need to know is before you need to know it. And I think we need to be a little better, not at predicting the future, but anticipating. For give you an example, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when I first had a website, people would say, are you making money? Now, when I first had my website, maybe it was even longer than that. When I first had my website, I wasn't making any money off my website. And so people would say, well, why do you have the website? And I said, because someday this is going to be central to sales and marketing, and I want to master it now. And, I wasn't prophetic. I got lucky and I was right. And I'd learned a lot, haven't been able to keep up because the wheel of change has spun so quickly in digitization. But that's a good example of something I did right. Did a lot of things wrong, but something I did right.
And Mark, I want to share something personal with you, which I've never had a chance to say to you, but, over the years with the National Speakers Association, and our version that we had when I was in the UK at the time, the Professional Speaking Association, then we started Professional Speaking Association in the Middle East. But all those years with the NSA, and you haven't shared this yet, but going from those days to eventually becoming president of that organization. I met many presidents, but you were just at a different level. And I just want to share that with you, where I don't want to disrespect our friend Scott, okay? Okay. But out of all the presidents, you're my favorite. And the reason why is when you're in that audience and you have a president of an organization, you can have someone representing the organization, I get that. But when you've got someone on stage where you hear them, you watch them in action, you go, wow, one day I aspire to get to that level. Is what you did for me when I went to NSA. So thank you, on a personal note, because you are, your precision, your eloquence, how you articulate things, your stage presence is just the best I've ever seen.
Well, you're very kind. And let me just open that up for everybody's thinking. I think that's when purpose meets position, because I've had positions that perhaps in the past I took for the wrong reasons and didn't bring that kind of expertise or passion to it. So when your purpose and your position align, good things can happen. And I think that's our ongoing struggle, because Reg, one of the things that we really haven't talked about is that your purpose can change. You may get to a point in your life, and entrepreneurs do this all the time. They don't want to grow their business. They want to pitch a tent somewhere else, right? They want to start a new business for a different reason. And so that's why, to me, our kids are roughly the same age, in their late teens, early 20s. I used to tell my boys when they were little and they had more technology than I had and had my entire lifetime, they'd say they were bored. And I'd say, boys, bored is a choice. It's not a circumstance. We live in a world that even on the worst day has so much interesting stuff to think about. And the reason I say that is because a lot of business leaders, not just entrepreneurs, a lot of business leaders have never done the hard work of getting in touch with what it is they're passionate about and what their purpose is. And like I said, I'll circle back to what I said earlier. You're going to bump up against an existential wall and go, why did I do that? It's better to do it before you hit the wall.
So can I ask you, Mike, just going back to the intention imperative. So you were saying about this thing about action that was linked. Could you expand on that? So with the philosophy behind that book and this action part.
Well, here's the action part. You know, for years I've talked about leadership, and leadership, everybody talks about leadership or claims to. You could throw a rock and hit a leadership speaker or consultant these days. I wanted to focus on, in my opinion, what was different about leadership, the 3 shifts that leaders needed to make. And in the book, and that's really the second half of the book, I talk about these 3 shifts. The first is from organization to culture. And culture, I love that word because so many people talk about it and have no idea what it means. I mean, that's one of those words like excellence. Now, Tom Peters and Bob Waterman framed up excellence, but you can read a dozen books on culture and they'll all take different approaches. And I decided culture was pretty simple. It was everything people thought and believed that resulted in what they aspired and did, you know, what they did and what they achieved. And it's the DNA, you know, of the organization. The org chart doesn't always give you a lot of information, but the culture does. And I think the companies that have survived this setback globally did so not on organization because their organization crumbled. I mean, the org chart crumbled. People were working at home. People weren't coming into work. Relationships and connections changed. The strong culture said, you know what? We know the why and what we're about, and how we do it, we can be flexible. And so in the book, I talk about 5 levers to create culture, because you either inherit one by default or you create one. The second one, and we've talked about this a little bit, is inspiration, because, you know, by the way, millennials we got digitals, and now, you know, I've heard Generation C for COVID. Younger employees, there's a big difference, and that is they don't want to just be motivated, they want to be inspired. You don't have to look far to see that young employees today, they want to make money, but they want to feel like they're doing something for a bigger reason than themselves.
You absolutely hit the nail on the head, because that future generation, it's a bit like my eldest son right now, who's just joined our family business. There's 2 things he made very clear to me. He said, 1, Dad, I want balance in my life. I'm not going to work as hard as you, 7 days a week. 2, I want to make social impact.
Yeah.
You know, he set the ground rules from day one.
Just defined 3 generations, Reg. I mean, I think, you know, it's a pretty broad brushstroke. But, and by the way, older generations, I find this interesting. The generation ahead of my generation thought we were slackers. And the generation behind my generation, we thought we're slackers. So it's pretty normal. It's kind of like siblings, right? Your older brother thinks the younger brother's a knucklehead. The younger brother thinks the next younger brother's the knucklehead.
Yeah.
So what I say is instead of focusing on the differences, focus on the good things. And here's a good thing about millennials. 87% of them would rather do work that mattered than be recognized for it. And that's astounding to me, because I'm a baby boomer. If you paid me enough money, I'd sell my soul, right, Reggie? You know, it's like,
I get it. Completely get it.
What am I? How much are you going to pay me? Yeah, that's going to be a terrible strain on my life, my family, and moving, but I'll do it. And like you said, your son said, no, I want balance. Nothing wrong. Now, I would just interject. I think sometimes we got to coach younger people that long-term balance often requires short-term imbalance. I don't think it's always realistic to think we're going to come out of the gate and be balanced. The danger is we never become balanced, you know, and I say if you're 50 years old and you're still imbalanced and working like crazy and killing yourself, you're not doing it right. So here's the secret to inspiration. Inspiration is motivation to the power of purpose. Motivation is what they get paid, their perks, their benefits, the tangibles. And purpose is why they chose to get those things where they work with you. And when you can put the carrot and stick together with the desires and the aspirations, again, people will be very committed. They'll work hard. They won't work hard like you and I worked hard, you know, where you proved you worked hard because you showed up early every morning and stayed late. You know, I know a lot of people showed up early to do crossword puzzles and stayed late because they, you know, wanted their boss to see them in their cubicle when the boss left.
You just mentioned something else there, Mark. What comes first, the carrot or the stick?
Well, as a parent, I always said discipline. If you haven't been the beneficiary of wise and prudent discipline when you were growing up, you're probably going to have a hard go of it in the real world, because I think parents we have to balance relationship and discipline.
Mm.
And by the time you get to the workplace, when a young person says, "You're not my mother or father," maybe the correct response is, "And I wish I didn't have to be." Because what that suggests is maybe that person thinks you're being their mother or father because you're controlling them, when all you're trying to do is help them develop the discipline
Mm-hmm.
of an effective and productive employee.
Yeah, I get it. Now, by the way, while you're talking, I'm just going to bring up the screen share again, and you mentioned a little bit about the new book, but there's a classic there, The Fred Factor, which I just wanted everyone to see, so in case they've never seen this book before, and a few of the others there. I wanted to ask, what's the feeling like when you publish your book and then it becomes a New York Times bestseller? What is that feeling like?
It's a good feeling, and it was even better because I knew the odds of ever having a best-selling book. And so I wish I could say, I wrote on a piece of paper and put on my bulletin board, I didn't. I just wanted a book that did pretty well. I wanted a book that represented me in my work. So when it did become a bestseller, it was like a double win for me.
What was it about that book, Mark? Without the wanting it to become a bestseller, you obviously poured your heart into that book, but there was something about that book that connected with so many people. What was it?
Well, three things, but primarily it was a true story. It wasn't a fable. Fables are fine,
right,
but we're all a little skeptical when we read a fable because we know it's scripted and it's directed. I just wrote a book about a real life postal carrier. And so it was a true story. I think the best communication, even technical communication, is always story driven. Stories are the coat pegs people hang ideas on. So if you give somebody 23 facts in a 2-hour seminar and there's no story to help them retain those facts, you probably failed. So number one, it was a true story. Number two, it was a true story about an average, ordinary person, which we all happen to be. We sometimes think other very, very wealthy and rich people aren't average and ordinary, but they all started out that same way. See, if I'd have written that book about, Bill Gates or Warren Buffett or Carlos Slim or one of the global, billionaires, people would have said, yeah, that's great, but the odds of me doing that are about 1 in a trillion. I wrote about a guy that puts mail in a box.
And the postman, that was his real name, Fred?
Yeah, his full name is Fred Shea. He's retired now, but his full name is Fred Shea, S-H-E-A. Terrific guy. And by the way, a guy that never did any of this because he thought he might deliver mail to a guy that wrote a book about him. He used to say to me, and this still astounds me, he'd say, Mark, doesn't everybody do their work this way? And I'd say, Fred, if they did, nobody'd buy the book. He didn't even know he was an anomaly. He was just a person. He always told me, I did it because I thought it was the right thing to do. And so it's a story about an average, ordinary person. And the third part is I wanted to make it easily actionable. I hate reading a book where I go, that's a great idea, but what do I do with that?
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah.
You just gave me 5 reasons to do something, but you didn't tell me how to do it. So I'm pleased. I got a negative review once. I've gotten a negative review a lot of times on my books. This one review I loved. This guy goes, "This book's written at a 7th grade level. It's trash." So I thought, I wonder what level it is written at, because I wrote it back in 2004. So I went, you get a block of text, right? And you put it into the free, grade level analyzer. It's written at a 5th grade level. And I wanted to put a response to his review and say, it's not written at a 7th grade level. It's written at a 5th grade level, neener, because it was just amazing to me. And by the way, the guy talked about it as a deficit. It's a asset. People don't want to, I like words. I love words, and I'll read challenging work. But generally, when it comes to a book that you want to read quickly and apply to your work, don't make it too hard. Make it, the word I like to use is accessible. Make it accessible.
And I think that's relevant even more now, Mark, in today's world, dealing with busy people who, when we share information with our community, they're like, keep it short. We want something simple, something that we can digest immediately. We don't want something that takes us a long time to read. So it's interesting how things are changing. People want 20, 30, maximum, maybe even 50-page books that they can skim through in half an hour, 45 minutes and be done.
Well, and if you, and you probably have talked about this, but in movies, I'm not a big horror movie, scary movie fan, but any good scary movie you go to, there's levity. Something funny happens, not like a comedy, but there's something lighthearted that happens every 7 or 8 minutes. And the reason for that is because you can't stay emotionally, what's the word? Well, frightened, scared. If you do
on
that
the edge, on the edge.
yeah,
Almost,
if you do that too long, it's not pleasant. You wouldn't sign up for. I mean, people, have terrible circumstances in real life, but you don't pay to feel bad for 2 hours or scared. And so, I think even when we're conveying important information, you got to let people up for air. They suffocate.
Can I ask you, Mark? I don't know how many speeches you've done. Do you track? You've worked with 2,600 plus clients.
Yeah, I don't know. Probably half again that many if you go back 33 years in pro bono, things like that.
And do you still get that buzz when you're on the platform?
I get the buzz for a different reason, hopefully because I'm a little older and wiser. And that is, in the past, you got the buzz because you pulled it off, right? You did something that people liked and they applauded, or if you were really lucky, they stood up and applauded. But now the bigger buzz to me comes when I do what I call good work. Good work is when I go, you know what? This audience wasn't as demonstrative as yesterday's audience was, but man, they were into it. They were taking notes, and people come up afterwards and say, that's what I needed to hear. So I still get the buzz, but the buzz is less about me and a whole lot more about the audience. I don't get the buzz as much getting on and off an airplane. However, the world has given me a huge break from getting on and off airplanes, and believe it or not, I'm willing to get on and off an airplane again. I think this is a good recreation.
You've had your break, yeah.
I've had my break.
But do you see that model changing now for the future based on what has happened with the crisis and having that time to think, like what we're doing now? A lot of us are now virtual, online. Do you see the model changing now in the speaking industry for the future?
I think it's got to change. Part of my work says, if you're a leader, don't ever think things go back to normal. Normal's ahead of you, not behind you. And if you think you know what's normal, you quit paying attention. Now, the good news is we're going to be hypersensitive to health issues and pandemics, but there's other things we also need to be here in the United States. Holy smokes, we're in the middle of COVID, and then we have, protesting and rioting in the streets.
Wow.
We expect locusts to come and eat us, next. And it's so funny. And I heard
the aliens are coming next. So,
something. But the point is that people, believe it or not, got so flat-footed dealing on COVID, they never thought, wow, change isn't linear. Change doesn't wait until the big one's over and go, okay, COVID's over, we're ready for another change. It happens all the time. So I call it the new abnormal. Whatever happens, as abnormal as it seems, is really probably some semblance of normal. But things have got, and I'll tell you, Reg, I think things are going to change, not just because they have to. That's part of it. I think things are going to change because COVID showed us we didn't need to do it the way we've been doing it. I like being on stage, but a meeting planner that has to spend, $800,000 on a facility and go through that brain damage, and now can do 6 smaller meetings and include a virtual element, he or she's going, this ain't that bad. So I think things are going to change. I do think we'll all be back on stage again. I don't know if the audiences will be as big. I used to occasionally hit a couple thousand, 10,000, 12,000 people. It might be a while. Even if we do, as we expect, have a vaccine, I think there are going to be other reasons that getting lots of people in the same room are dangerous, or at least risky. So yes, I think it's going to change, and I have no idea. I'm not a, we got great friends that are futurists, our buddy Graham. I always say predicting the future is easy. Predicting it correctly is really hard.
So on that note, let's talk about the past for a second. When it comes to all the engagements that you've done, we all have memorable speeches, whether it was for something that happened with the audience or the client, but also for ourselves. You know, can you think back to a couple of moments in your career where things really shifted for you as a professional speaker being on the platform? Is there a memorable event or a memorable speech or an occasion that really changed things for you?
There certainly were some memorable occasions, but one was a process. When I started full-time speaking, I was 27. I'd come out of sales and marketing, but obviously I was young. I didn't have a lot of experience. This was so long ago that we used audio cassette tapes, not videos. We used audio cassette tapes. Now that was fortuitous for me because when you're 27, nobody can tell how old you are on tape. So I would get hired to speak to older audiences, and I'd walk in and I'd be the youngest guy in the room. And part of me was scared to death that somebody would jump up in the middle of my speech and go, BS, you don't know anything, right? So that caused me to be so content driven, to work so hard to just overwhelm people with ideas that nobody could do that, right? And I was successful in the content part. I was pretty strong in the education part, but there were some times I'd be on a program where I'd do this, I think very informative presentation, and then he'd have a humorist, and my reviews would be okay, and the humorist would kill it. And I thought, well, that's not fair. But it is fair because A, the humorist was doing what he or she was hired to do. And I was doing what I was hired to do, but I learned from the humorist. And it goes back to what we're saying. People want to be educated and entertained simultaneously.
Right.
It's not an either or. So one of the big shifts is when I kind of like pulled back on the overwhelm them with content and started to say, how can I have more fun, give less content, and get better results? And it's not only doable, it's the only way you can get better results is not try to squeeze too much into a program or seminar. Right. One of the things I always go back to is one is I had a client in the desert that had a problem with their meal. They were in the desert that day doing some kind of an activity, and they ended up having like a 3-hour happy hour. And by the time I was introduced, they were throwing rolls. Not at me. I mean, they were nice people. They were throwing rolls at each other and maybe other kinds of food. And I had been hired to do an hour. I went 17 minutes, which was, I think, 16 minutes too long. And I walked to the back of the room, the meeting planner. I said, ma'am, you can keep the money. I didn't do my hour. She goes, are you kidding me? She goes, you earned every penny that I paid you. And if you'd have gone any longer, I would have been upset. So that was memorable. That was just my intuition that, yeah, they don't need a whole hour.
That's great. And when it comes to publishing books, for someone out there who is thinking about it, you've had 8 books, you've got more in the pipeline, I'm sure. What's the secret to getting a book published? And not just once, but 3, 4, 5, 6 times. I mean, that's incredible.
Well, the first question, because I get that question a lot, you got to ask yourself, especially because entrepreneurs, I heard someone once say that even though we've been told everybody has a book inside of them, for a lot of people, that's where it should stay. And there are people who write books that, they don't add much of anything, and it's an ego trip. So the first thing I always say is, and business people, practitioners right now, this is your golden time. The non-practitioner may be entertaining and a good writer, but a practitioner that can write well has got much more credibility, because I know they're not just talking about how to do it, they did it. But you got to ask yourself, what do I want my book to do? Do you want it to position you? Do you want it to be a calling card? People say, well, should I go with a traditional publisher? I don't know. What do you want your book to do? If you want people to see your book in a bookstore and then assume, rightly or wrongly, that you must be a big deal, then you probably should pursue a different, a traditional publisher. If you want something you can use to educate your company, your vendors, your clients, then maybe you should skip the 2 to 3 year process and self-publish the book. The book industry, like every other profession, has changed dramatically in that it's not just digitization, but there's just far more books available, and it's over to get the attention of the buyer now is very difficult. And here's the irony. You get the attention of the buyer by writing a best-selling book. Then the publisher expects the next book to sell as well as the best-selling book. And by the way, if you get one best-selling book, and I know we know people that have had several, but if you get one, you're pretty lucky. And I can tell you, none of my books since Fred have sold like Fred has. However, for me, having that hit, because I developed a brand, people like, oh, the Fred guy, that helped get a lot more of my books published. Now, the reason I write books isn't to become a bestseller. I'd love if it happened. But my clients, I've been in the business 33 years, and my clients go, oh yeah, we heard him, used him, looked at him a long time ago, didn't want to use him. I want an excuse to come back and say, I've got something new, something that can benefit you. And if they agree, then they look at hiring me. So I do it as a practice in developing new material to prove to the client that I still have potential.
But I think that is absolutely smart, Mark, because if any business in the world, if they're going to keep regenerating, innovating, and growing, you have to do that. If you've got 2,500, customers and clients who know Mark, surely it makes sense. What's next? Where can we add value next? That for me, it has to happen. And it's a lot easier, as you know, with your experience, to go back to 2,500 people and add value than looking for the next 2,500 people.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's about developing a fan base. You don't need a huge fan base, but you do need a fan base. You need people that are actually more than fans. They're loyal consumers of your product. They're loyal supporters of your work. And the highest compliment is when somebody says, I don't know what the book's about, but if you wrote it, I want to buy it. And that's not unique to me. That's any author. There are authors, I read a lot of fiction, and there are authors that when they write a book, I'm going to buy the book and find out what it's about when I start to read it.
With your books, Mark, is there a common thread that's running through all of the books? Is there
Actually, there is. I didn't even know it for like 2 or 3 books. I wrote The Fred Factor, and Tom Peters back in 2004 put together a list of his favorite quotes of the year. And one of them was from The Fred Factor. And it was the quote, "Nobody can prevent you from choosing to be extraordinary." And I looked at the books that I had written and all the books since then, and that's the underlying message. The potential principle is about being an extraordinary learner. You don't need a title to be a leader. It's about being an extraordinary leader, whether or not you have a title, because that's the ultimate freedom. I can't make you be extraordinary. I love it when people say, can you make somebody be a Fred? I said, yeah, I couldn't make my kids take out the garbage when they lived at home. So don't look for the how to make people do it. Yeah. But it really has been first unconsciously and now consciously part of my big message. It's a choice. You may not have been raised, encouraged, rewarded, taught to be extraordinary, but I think one of the most exciting things is when we wake up and go, you know what, damn it, I'm just going to do it because I want to be extraordinary. Screw it. I don't care if they don't pay me more. People say, well, I do a good job at work. They don't pay me more. Well, maybe you're doing a good job at the wrong company. But are you doing the good job to get paid more? Fred didn't. Fred did an amazing job that I wrote a book about that 2 million people bought. And never once did Fred wake up and say, boy, I'm doing this because someday somebody's going to write a book about it.
Yeah, I like that. So being extraordinary as a thread, as a core all the way through, I like that. So a couple other things I want to touch base with you on, with the time we've got left. Who influenced you the most in your younger years? Who built, who instilled those traits, built your character, your attitude? Who influenced you the most?
Well, there are 2 people early on, and one will probably surprise people, and the other probably won't if they're familiar with the history of professional speaking. But, I grew up watching Billy Graham on TV. Now, I'm not going to get religious on anybody here. Mm-hmm. But what is amazing about Billy Graham wasn't just his integrity. People in a high profile, how many people die and then a year or 2 later we find out, whoa, they buried some kind of hideous scandal. I always say, wait to pick your heroes until they've been dead a while. But Billy Graham, has withstood the test of being deceased and having been who he presented himself to be, whether you agreed with him or not. But what I loved about his preaching, and it's true for teaching and speaking, is he was simple and deliberate and powerful. He wasn't tricky. He didn't use big words. And that's what gave him credibility. So I was very influenced, I guess in an ironic way. I got a little bit away from it when I got crazy about, stuffing too much content in. But the second person stylistically who influenced me was Zig Ziglar. Because Zig was the first motivational speaker I heard. Zig was the first motivational book I read. And of course, and here's the danger. I bet there are a lot of people out there that still sound like Zig Ziglar. You emulate to learn, but you innovate to earn. That's a long way of saying I learned by emulating the style of a Billy Graham or a Zig Ziglar. But over time, I realized I had to innovate my own style, or else people go, well, let's not hire him. Let's just go listen to Zig Ziglar.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Who is this Zig Sanborn who's turned up as a hybrid model?
I don't think Zig was going to adopt me, So, that, and I've said that before. A lot of businesses are that way. They look at, they have this team that looks at whatever other competition or competitors doing, and they say, we got to do that too. You'll only be as good as a competitor you emulate. You'll never be better than a competitor you emulate. You've got to do something that is valued by your customer that the competitor's not doing. That's the secret place that you're looking for in any business is what is it that if I do it, and by the way, you may have to do all the other basic things that the competitor does. You can't, strip it down too bare, but you say, what can I add to the mix that will really make me stand out? And people will go, we chose them because they do this and the competitors don't.
I love that. Love that. So some good influences there. And what about the future when it comes to the Sanborn family legacy? I'm hot on legacies. That's the work that we do. What does that look like for you, present, future?
Well, I learned a long time ago and I started teaching, don't wait until you retire to build your legacy. You need to build your resume and legacy simultaneously. By the time most people retire, they're lucky to have another 15 or 20 years on the earth, right? And you work 60, 70 years. So why not combine the two and have an eye towards the resume, which is a practical thing you use in your business, and your legacy, which is what outlives you. Nobody goes back and refers to your resume after you retire, especially at your funeral. I am, I've got, being a father, getting married and being a father is the most fun I've ever had. And I really just love, now that, my kids are adults, being able to engage them as adults. And I get inspired by my kids, as I'm sure you do. But I think now what I'm looking at is two things. One is, how can I continue to be of greatest impact to the people I want to serve and have fun doing it? I still want to make money. I always said when COVID hit, I said, I want to, kind of retire someday. I don't want circumstance to retire me. I don't want people to say, yeah, he retired when COVID basically killed his business. So I say, and now thanks to digital technologies like Zoom and GoToWebinar and everything else, we have a chance to continue to make an impact. Different medium, but we still have a chance to make an impact. But I don't have to do much anymore. That doesn't mean I'm like Bill Gates rich. It just means I have enough saved that I don't have to go, man, I'm going to hate myself, but I'm going to take that all-day seminar in a place I never want to go visit because I need the money. Thankfully, not bragging, but thankfully, I don't have to do it. So I look at, do I want to do it, and will it make a positive impact? So I know that's pretty broad, but
No, I don't think so, Mark. I mean, we experience this a lot with family members, depending on what generation they are. Where, as you know, with the terminology, someone's in the business, the day-to-day grind, whether that's someone at head office or in our case on the platform you're in. It's your time to then on, where you've replicated yourself and you've got partners or a team, or your content is being distributed in a different way, to eventually, and without disclosing any confidential things. I know we've spoken about this a few weeks back, where one becomes an investor, and so you start balancing these things. But I really believe you're at that stage, and I've seen that with a lot of chairmen and founders of large businesses, where they feel the only way now is to do a bit of those things they love, but how can they now invest in others maybe? How can they build businesses as an investor?
Oh, I have some mentees. I didn't pick them, and I didn't even have a formal conversation. And I certainly, don't charge them. I may, get a free beer or a free meal, but it's so gratifying just to see ideas that as you get older have become obvious to you that we forget. weren't obvious to us when we were their age, and we can shave 5, 10, 15 years of learning off the curve for them by sharing those ideas. And that is incredibly gratifying. So I'm glad you brought that up, because it isn't just about the impact we make with our customers, it's the impact we make with people who matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And are any of your sons following your path?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just thinking that my oldest son just graduated from college with a degree in aerospace engineering. Too much math for me, even though I was an economist by training. And he is a second lieutenant, U.S. Marines, with a flight spot, which is a big deal, because you don't just, if you take 100 Marines, it's not like, any of them could fly. It's a very competitive thing. However, what's been gratifying is watching him use leadership skills that he was around because of my work in my business. So he's not in this business, but he's using the skills that he learned from what I did in my business. Now, my younger son is in real estate. He's also a rapper.
Oh, wow.
A rapper.
A real estate rapper. That's unique.
Well, yeah, I told him, I said, that might be his hook in real estate. But what's fascinating, and there are very few things I know less about than rap, although I've learned a lot, because, when your kids get interested, you're like, I need to look into this. When I looked at the wordplay he uses, and by the way, his mother has a stroke when she hears, because it's genre specific rap. But when you look at the wordplay and the ideas, he sent me a song once, and and I said, I like the song, but it just doesn't seem upbeat. And he goes, well, that's because it's Dickinson's theory of cognitive dilemma. And I'm like, I thought it was a rap song about going out and raising hell, right? And what I realized is that his strength is as a wordsmith. Now, I'm never going to be the guy that says, yeah, you got that from me. But you hope, right? You think the fact he was around parents who were deeply in the business of using words to make a living, hopefully that rubbed off on him. That and the fact that—
But you know what? I think he's on something there, because if you could, let him know from Uncle Reg that if he can combine rap for selling real estate with videos for the under 35s or the under 30s, he's on it.
Yeah, I've talked to him about that. And of course, one of the things about your kids is the idea that comes from dad isn't as good as the idea.
Yeah. Tell me about it. So next time, I'll share my ideas that I want to pass on to my kids. And if they can come from you and we can swap that way, that'll be a lot easier.
I'll say, Jack, here's what Reg says. And you can say to your kids, here's what Mark says.
Here's what Mark said. Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure. I could spend hours talking to you, Mark, but I know from a time point of view, we're coming to almost an hour with this interview, and I hope the viewers have enjoyed it. So for those of you still watching, appreciate you watching to the end. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, leave your comments, but also go down to the description area and you'll see Mark's details about his personal website, his company, and some of his social media links. So make sure you connect with him, and don't forget to go to Amazon or your local bookshop and get all 8 of his books. Okay. So Mark, maybe in closing, I always like to make sure there's one extra thing that we can squeeze in. With all your experience of leadership, companies have succeeded and failed. If you were to summarize, maybe with 2 or 3 tips in today's world, what do you really need to build a successful business with everything you've seen?
Yeah, I don't want to be flip, but one would be find something you can do better than anybody else that does it. That's what I wrote in my brother's graduation card. He now has started and or owned about 4 or 5 businesses. Mm-hmm. And I said, I don't know what you're going to do, because he didn't either. But I said, find something that you can do better than anybody else. And that's that unique factor. That's that value add, if you will, that differentiates you from your competitors. I would say number 2, my epitaph won't say he was the smartest, best, richest, or anything else. If I could choose my epitaph, it would be, he worked harder than anybody else who did what he did, because that I control. And I call it discipline. Discipline is doing what needs to be done even when you don't feel like doing it. It's not discipline if it needs to be done and you don't feel like it and don't do it. It's discipline when you know what? I don't feel like it, but it needs to be done. So discipline, which we talked about a little bit earlier, is critical. And the final one, and it trumps the first two, is fear nothing but to waste the present moment. Because if you pay attention to the moments of your life, they become your life. Life happens in moments. That doesn't mean every moment is equally important or that every moment has an equal opportunity. But the older one gets, when they can start to see the end of the runway that they knew was there, but didn't want to believe when they were 20 or 30, you go, let's not squander the time. I want to make the most of every moment. And if that means the best use of my moment is to daydream and enjoy thinking about something abstract, choose to do it. Don't do it accidentally. And if the best use of your time is to read a book, don't just read a book out of habit. Read a book because you have a reason. You want to be entertained or you want to be educated. So that's the final thought. Fear nothing but to waste the present moment.
Lovely. 3 fantastic tips. Words of wisdom. Thank you very much, Mark. And God bless you. Look forward to seeing you on the platform soon. And
Likewise.
also with more virtual programs that will be delivered in the future with some of your new ventures. And thank you so much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Reg. All the best.
Thank you.